Right now, as you sit here, 37 trillion cells in your body are running a civilization you've never seen. They have supply chains, communication networks, border security. They have factories that manufacture a molecule so precisely engineered that without it, every single one of those 37 trillion citizens begins to starve. That molecule is insulin. And in over 150 million American bodies, something has gone catastrophically wrong with the way that molecule is made, or the way it's received. The world calls all of it diabetes. One word. But behind that word, there are two completely different wars, fought for different reasons, by different enemies, with different weapons, in different theaters of the body. And there is a third war, a covert one, that most doctors don't even recognize until it's already been misdiagnosed. This is what those wars look like from the inside. Before any war begins, a kingdom must exist. Imagine zooming past your skin, past muscle fiber, past the slick walls of blood vessels, and arriving at a small, unassuming organ tucked behind your stomach. 6 inches long, weighing about 80 grams. The pancreas. It doesn't look like much, pale, textured like wet clay, but scattered across its surface are roughly 1 million microscopic clusters, each one an island unto itself. The islets of Langerhans. Think of them as gated industrial districts. Each islet contains several thousand specialized cells, and among them, the most important workers in your metabolic economy, beta cells. Beta cells do one thing. They manufacture insulin. And they do it with a precision that makes modern pharmaceutical factories look primitive. Here's how it works. You eat. Carbohydrates break down into glucose, the simplest fuel your cells can burn. That glucose floods into your bloodstream. And the moment blood glucose levels begin to rise, beta cells detect the change within seconds. Not minutes. Seconds. They open calcium channels on their membranes. Calcium ions rush in, and that calcium signal triggers the exocytosis of pre-packaged insulin vesicles. Tiny sacs loaded with insulin molecules, already manufactured and waiting at the cell's edge. The vesicles fuse with the membrane. Insulin spills into the bloodstream, and within minutes, that insulin reaches every corner of your body, docking onto insulin receptors on the surface of muscle cells, liver cells, fat cells. Those receptors are like locks. Insulin is the key. When the key turns, a glucose transporter, a protein channel called GLUT4, rises from inside the cell to the surface. It opens, and glucose flows in. Energy delivered. Crisis averted. Blood sugar returns to baseline. This happens roughly 100 times a day, silently, seamlessly. Your body running a logistics operation of staggering complexity, and you never notice. Until something goes wrong. And what goes wrong, and where, is where the word diabetes splits into two entirely different stories. But that's the problem. The world treats them as one. War number 1. Type 1 diabetes. To understand this war, forget everything you've heard about sugar, about diet, about lifestyle. None of it applies here. Type 1 is not a metabolic failure. It is an execution. Deep inside the immune system, in the thymus gland and the bone marrow, your body trains an elite defense force. T lymphocytes. T cells. Soldiers whose sole purpose is to identify invaders. Viruses, bacteria, cancer cells, and destroy them. The training is brutal. T cells that react to the body's own tissues are supposed to be eliminated during development, a process called central tolerance. It's the immune system's way of teaching soldiers, these are your own people, do not fire. But in type 1 diabetes, something in that training fails. A subset of T cells graduates with a corrupted target profile. They identify beta cells, the insulin factories, as foreign enemies. And they begin the march. The attack doesn't start with a bang. It's a slow, silent infiltration. Months, sometimes years. T cells cross into the islets of Langerhans and begin what immunologists call insulitis, a quiet siege. They surround the beta cells, release cytokines, chemical signals that punch holes in cell membranes. They deploy perforin proteins that literally drill channels into the beta cell wall. Granzyme enzymes pour through those channels and trigger apoptosis, programmed cell death. The beta cell, a cell that did nothing wrong, that was performing its function flawlessly, receives the order to self-destruct. And it obeys. One by one, beta cells die. The islets thin. Insulin output drops, but the body compensates. The remaining cells work harder, produce more, cover the losses. And for a long time, no one notices. Not the person, not their doctor, not any standard blood test. Because the system holds until roughly 80 to 90% of beta cells are gone. Then it collapses. Blood sugar spikes uncontrollably. The body, starving for energy it can no longer access, begins burning fat, flooding the blood with ketones, acidifying it. The result is diabetic ketoacidosis, DKA, a metabolic emergency that, without exogenous insulin, is fatal within days. This is when most people get diagnosed, not during the quiet years of the siege, not when intervention could have been studied, at the moment of collapse. And from that moment forward, for the rest of their lives, they depend on exogenous insulin, injected or pumped, multiple times a day, every day. There is no remission. There is no reversal. The factories are gone. Type 1 affects roughly 2 million Americans. Most are diagnosed in childhood or adolescence, some in their 20s. And the most painful part, the part that burns every person living with type 1, is the question they get asked more than any other. Can't you just eat less sugar? No, they can't just do anything. Their immune system executed their insulin supply. Sugar had nothing to do with it. But the world doesn't know that, because the world calls it by the same name as something completely different. War number 2, type 2 diabetes. This war doesn't begin with an attack. It begins with a refusal to listen. Remember those insulin receptors on the surface of your cells? The locks that insulin keys are designed to open? In type 2, those locks begin to change. Not overnight, not from one meal, over years. When cells are exposed to chronically elevated insulin, from sustained high glycemic diets, from excess visceral fat secreting inflammatory cytokines, from genetic predispositions that amplify the effect, the receptors begin to downregulate. Think of it as a neighborhood where someone blasts music every night. At first, you hear every note. After a year, you've stopped noticing. The receptors go deaf. Insulin arrives at the cell door. It docks. It turns the key. But the lock doesn't move. The GLUT4 transporters stay below the surface. Glucose can't enter. So the beta cells, still alive, still functional, do the only logical thing. They produce more insulin, louder signals, more keys for locks that aren't opening. This is hyperinsulinemia, and it is the silent phase of type 2 that can last a decade before any doctor notices. But that's not the worst part. While the beta cells are screaming louder, the body is deteriorating quietly in every direction. Excess insulin drives fat storage, particularly visceral fat around the organs. That visceral fat becomes an endocrine organ of its own, secreting interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha, inflammatory molecules that further damage insulin receptors. It's a feedback loop. Resistance causes more insulin. More insulin causes more fat. More fat causes more inflammation. More inflammation causes more resistance. A metabolic siege with no external enemy. The body at war with its own communication system. Meanwhile, the liver, which should suppress glucose production when insulin is present, stops responding too. It dumps glucose into the bloodstream even when levels are already high. Fasting blood sugar creeps up. A 1C drifts above 5.7. And still, most people feel nothing. Maybe fatigue, maybe brain fog. Maybe they blame it on stress, or aging, or poor sleep. Then, after years of compensating, the beta cells begin to burn out. Overworked, exhausted. They suffer from endoplasmic reticulum stress and oxidative damage. They begin to die. Not from an immune attack, from exhaustion. And this is the moment type 2 diabetes officially appears on a blood test. Not when the disease started. That was a decade ago. But when the body's last compensation mechanism finally fails. Type 2 affects over 38 million Americans. It accounts for roughly 90 to 95% of all diabetes diagnoses. And it is wrapped in more shame, more misconception, and more moral judgment than almost any other chronic disease. You did this to yourself. But the biology tells a more complicated story. Genetics loads the gun. Epigenetics adjusts the trigger sensitivity. The food environment, engineered for hyperpalatability and chronic overconsumption, applies the pressure. And the healthcare system waits until the shot has fired to even look. Two wars. One destroys the factory. The other deafens the customers. Same word. Completely different biology. Completely different experience. Completely different lives. But what if I told you there's a third war? One that starts like the second, but is actually the first. One that tricks doctors into prescribing the wrong weapons for years. Latent autoimmune diabetes in adults. LADA. Some researchers call it type 1.5. Others refuse to give it a separate name at all. It sits in a gray zone between two classifications, and that gray zone is destroying lives. Here's what happens. An adult, typically between 30 and 50, goes to the doctor. Their fasting blood sugar is high. Their A1C is elevated. They might be slightly overweight or completely lean. The doctor sees the numbers, sees an adult, and diagnoses type 2 diabetes. Standard protocol. Metformin is prescribed. Dietary advice is given, and the patient walks out believing they have a metabolic condition they can manage with lifestyle changes. But inside their body, something entirely different is happening. Because LADA is autoimmune. Just like type 1, the immune system is attacking beta cells. T cells are infiltrating the islets of Langerhans. Insulitis is progressing. Beta cells are dying, not from overwork, but from execution. The difference? The attack is slower, much slower. In childhood type 1, beta cell destruction can reach critical mass in months. In LADA, the decline unfolds over years, sometimes 5, sometimes 10. Slow enough that the patient looks like type 2 on paper. And this is where the damage begins. Metformin, the first-line drug for type 2, works by reducing hepatic glucose output and improving insulin sensitivity. But if your problem isn't resistance, if your problem is that the insulin factories are being demolished, metformin is not just ineffective, it's a distraction. Sulfonylureas, another common type 2 medication, actually whip the beta cells into producing more insulin, force the remaining factories to work harder. In a LADA patient, this accelerates beta cell destruction. You're sending ammunition to factories that are on fire. Studies estimate that LADA accounts for anywhere from 2 to 12% of all diabetes cases initially diagnosed as type 2. In some populations, the number is higher. A landmark study in the United Kingdom found that approximately 6 to 10% of patients diagnosed with type 2 actually had autoantibodies indicating autoimmune beta cell destruction. That means millions of people worldwide may be fighting the wrong war with the wrong weapons. The diagnostic key? A simple blood test. GAD65 antibodies, glutamic acid decarboxylase antibodies. If they're present, the immune system is attacking. The patient has autoimmune diabetes, regardless of their age. But this test is not part of standard diagnostic protocol for adults presenting with high blood sugar. It's not automatic. It's not routine. In many cases, it's never ordered at all. So the LADA patient continues on metformin. Their blood sugar gets harder to control. The doctor adds a second drug, then a third, then insulin, eventually. But by then, years have passed. Years during which appropriate early insulin therapy could have preserved remaining beta cell function longer. Years during which the patient heard, "You're not managing it well enough," when the truth was, the treatment never matched the disease. Now, what does any of this mean for you? If you live with type 1, you already know the weight of explaining your own disease to a world that confuses it with something else. You know the exhaustion of hearing dietary cures suggested for an autoimmune condition. You know what it means to calculate every meal, every hour, every unit. What you may not know is that research into beta cell regeneration and immunomodulation is advancing. Teplizumab, the first FDA-approved therapy to delay the onset of clinical type 1, demonstrated in trials that it could postpone diagnosis by an average of 2 years in high-risk individuals. It works by retraining the T cells, teaching the soldiers to stand down. It's not a cure, but it's the first time the word delay has been clinically validated for type 1. If you live with type 2, or if you've been told you're pre-diabetic, the biology we just described is not destiny. Insulin resistance is a spectrum, and it responds to intervention at every point. The GLP-1 receptor agonists, semaglutide, tirzepatide, have shown reductions in A1C of 1.5 to 2.4 percentage points in clinical trials. They work by mimicking an incretin hormone that enhances insulin secretion, suppresses glucagon, and slows gastric emptying. But they cost. Without insurance, semaglutide can exceed $1,000 a month, and supply constraints, driven partly by off-label demand for weight loss, have made access unreliable. There is no perfect weapon. There is no single protocol. The biology is complex. The healthcare system is imperfect. The financial barriers are real. But the first step, the step that costs nothing, is knowing which war you're fighting. If you were diagnosed with type 2 as an adult and your blood sugar has been progressively harder to control despite medication, ask your doctor about a GAD65 antibody test. Ask about C-peptide levels. Ask whether LADA has been ruled out. This isn't medical advice. It's a question you now know how to ask. 37 trillion cells. That's where we started. And now you've seen what most people never will. You've seen the factories that keep you alive, and the 2 different ways they can fall. You've seen an immune system turn against its own. You've seen a communication network go silent under the weight of its own signals. And you've seen a war disguised as the wrong war, costing years, costing function, costing trust. So the next time someone says the word diabetes, remember this. It's not one disease. It never was. It's a shared name for separate catastrophes, each demanding different knowledge, different compassion, and different action. And the person living with it, whichever war it is managing all of it. Every hour, every meal, every number on a screen at 3 in the morning. They deserve at least this much, that you know the difference. In the next episode, we go deeper into one battlefield, the insulin receptor, a molecular lock that, when it stops turning, triggers a cascade the medical community is only beginning to understand. If this changed something in what you knew, the next one will change more. This video is not medical advice. It's the map. Your doctor is the navigator.